Banjo Kazooie Grunty's Revenge released in 2003 in the era after Rare was bought out by Microsoft, yet they allowed it to go forward with a release exclusively on the Game Boy Advance, a Nintendo system, due to them having no competing handheld of their own. As it turns out, the Grunty's Revenge project began about 4 years prior, in 1999, preceding Banjo Tooie's release by about a year and a half, and roughly 2 years before the GBA had even launched. At this time, it was being worked on in a very early planning phase under the name Banjo Kazooie Grunty's Curse. What's more is that it was not originally a Game Boy Advance title, but was instead set to be developed for its predecessor, the Game Boy Color. Design documents leaked by a former Rare employee revealed that initial planning for the game first came together in August of '99, including a full story treatment. For the remainder of the year, a small team conceived of the various worlds that would make up the game, as well as the creatures that would inhabit them. Upon closer inspection, we can establish a number of cuts and changes that were made as development went on, including lost levels. According to the docs recovered, there was planned originally to be a total of 8 differently themed areas in the game. In the version released on Game Boy Advance, there are only 6. The 2 that didn't make the cut were named Mohendra Banjo and Fiery Furnace respectively. Mohendra Banjo was set to be world number 6 in the game, located within and around the ruins of an ancient temple. Its description reads as follows: deep in the jungles of the east, Banjo explores the ruins of the ancients. Jungle trees and vines mixed with rivers and ruins. Watch out for the spitting cobras that pop in and out of alcoves around the ruins. Moving walls with spikes make some ruin passages into forced scrolling sections. Use vines and snakes for ladders. Wall carvings with banjo references decorate the ruins. Burial chambers have coffins built into the ceilings and floors. Spiders sometimes drop down or jump out of these and attack Banjo. A number of cut enemies are talked of, like the aforementioned spitting cobra and scorpion enemies. Although the scorpion didn't eventually appear in Grunty's Revenge, a vaguely similar enemy named Stinglash was placed in the Bad Magic Bayou and Freezing Furnace stages. The other lost stage, Fiery Furnace, is described as an industrial factory zone populated by machinery and catwalks over vats of bubbling liquid metal. While Mohendra Banjo was dropped earlier on in the project's life, Fiery Furnace would live on for some time. It even made it into a prototype build of the Game Boy Advance game before being scaled back and merged with the Freezing Furnace level. As well as removed stages, the design documents reveal alternate earlier titles of those that were present in the finished product. Cliff Farm was first known as Cottage Farm, Bad Magic Bayou was Soggy Bog Swamp, and Freezing Furnace was called Freezing Fjord. What is perhaps one of the more interesting observations to be made about Banjo Grunty's Curse is its story, which differs quite substantially from the final game. To recap, Grunty's Revenge takes place 2 months after the first Banjo game, when Grunty's spirit is transferred to a mech suit built by Klungo as she becomes Mecha Grunty. She then kidnaps Kazooie and uses her magic to travel back in time, intent on preventing Banjo and Kazooie from ever meeting. Mumbo then uses his magic to send Banjo back through time to thwart her evil plan. The planned narrative for Grunty's Curse, however, does not feature any elements of time travel, nor is it set so soon after the first game. In this version, the story begins several years after Banjo Kazooie, and when Grunty returns in her newly mechanized form, she instead curses a few of the main characters. First of all, she turns Kazooie into an evil blue monster version of herself, who she then takes with her in a backpack, not unlike Banjo's. Then, she transforms Bottles into a funny creature, as the docs describe it, before finally warping the mind of Mumbo into making him fight Banjo, a diversionary tactic while she makes her escape. Banjo subsequently defeats Mumbo, causing him to break free of Mecha Grunty's gaze. At this point, a comedy set piece of some kind was planned in which Mumbo would continuously injure himself. It reads, Mumbo tries in vain to stop them, but with every step he takes, his luck gets worse. Out of thin air, his bad luck rains down on him. First, a black cat covers his face, then, blinded, he runs straight under a ladder, and as the cat jumps away, a mirror lands on him and lays him out in the broken glass. Mumbo gets up with a bandage on his head. This comedic interlude leaves Mumbo with amnesia, forgetting all of his spells. All he can recall is that Banjo will need to collect a handful of magic ingredients to return Bottles to his regular self. Banjo, at this juncture, realises that it has been so long since his last adventure that he has forgotten his moveset and will have to relearn it. Since Bottles, the usual provider of his tutorials, is indisposed in his new form, he is required to seek out a new character named Grandpa Mole, the father of Bottles. This character would later be changed slightly as development went on. He became Bozai, an elderly mole who Banjo meets in the past and teaches him his platforming repertoire. Bozai in Grunty's Revenge is suggested as being a distant relative of Bottles from an older generation, but the exact link in their family tree is never specified like it was here with Grandpa Mole. Towards the bottom of the plot treatment page lies an early draft of the ending, which fans will notice differs in some ways from that of Grunty's Revenge. In this version, Grunty does not dispatch Klungo to collect his sisters, as she does in Revenge, which leads into the events of Banjo Tooie. Instead, her spirit simply returns under the rock after her defeat at the hands of Banjo and Kazooie before it is revealed that her body has been reduced to a pile of bones. It's worth noting that the final iteration did not show her physical appearance under the boulder. That revelation was held back for Tooie. The original story of the game eventually was altered quite dramatically as time went on. However, we were able to ascertain that it is actually subtly referenced in Grunty's Revenge. After the Mecha Grunty boss encounter in the Breagle Beach world, Banjo rescues Kazooie, at which point he says, "Kazooie, am I glad to see you? I thought Grunty would have made you into a monster by now." Narrative elements aside, it's also worthy of note that the documents reveal a few transformations for Banjo that were later scrapped. Among these is B-Banjo, a power-up that appeared in both Banjo Kazooie and Tooie. It would have allowed the player to negotiate large platforming gaps by hovering indefinitely, as well as the ability to fire stingers in a straight line. The plans detail what are referred to as useless transformations too, all of which were ultimately dropped. These were joke transformations intended solely for comedic effect. It is noted that probably only one of them would have been used due to storage limitations, but several different options were under consideration. The first would have turned Banjo into a toaster with eyes that would pop out of his head in a slice of toast. Another was Washer Banjo, a form that debuted in Banjo Kazooie, warping him into a washing machine. The last of the three is simply named Milking Machine, an apparatus for milking cattle. A note in the docs states that the team's useless transformation of choice would need to be fully controllable, as it would likely be used as a secret code. In Grunty's Revenge, no such transformation is known to exist. Banjo Kazooie Grunty's Curse was worked on until late 1999. A small group of artists at Rare began to create assets for the game, including digital sprites for Banjo, Kazooie and Mecha Grunty. Not long after this, development halted before work was transferred to the Game Boy Advance. Currently, a playable prototype of Grunty's Curse is not known to have ever been produced. It appears to have only ever existed as an extensive plan for a game that was never made.